Good evening, this is Erabon. It is good to meet you here in this cathedral-like temple. For indeed, you have two on the top of your mountain. And this is the respectful, awesome, awe-inspiring, religious gravity, the Temple of Magnificence, the magnificent stained glass window, rays of light in a sparkling diamond-like circle shining out around the central podium where you imagine it is I stand. This is good. This radiance indicates a great uplifted spiritual being, which we are in a very real sense. It is useful for you to visualize us this way. And it was very good that you spent a solid 15 minutes on the inner light consciousness meditation, going through the meadow and the various terraces and the gardens, and your gradual ascent upwards, remembering the gist of each logo or statement or sentiment for each level, really dwelling upon the feeling, the vibe. This is your favorite term of late. Yes, it was very good. Good groundwork, good preparation for more solid communication. It enables us to communicate things of greater levity, if you will, or greater religious, spiritual impact. Grander truths, if you will. For you've seen us in many different lights, and this is perhaps the most useful in many regards. We have a very face-to-face like communication here. And your feeling of being in the house of God creates this immediate grasp of the nature of being in the presence of a far more advanced spiritual being or group of beings. But the focus on one as in one entity is very useful. There's a reason we use a name that implies a single entity. Well, this is the most effective channel through which we come to you, that of a being, an elevated spiritual being, an entity. Understand in a way that we are reflectivating, to use this reflectivity terminology again, to you in presenting, projecting in this realm where we meet. We are projecting into a form of an entity. this reflectivated entity, Erabon, is the channel through which we communicate to you, the channel for the other side, down below the mountain, at the foot of the mountain. This is a very useful and effective visualization. Yes, indeed. For it automatically creates this tangible, visceral sense of elevation. Natural elevation. Difference in elevation. Translating directly into a difference of state, of vibrational level. So you come up through 7 levels to meet us here. Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, violet. And here on the 7th level, at the top of the mountain, is where we meet. In this grand guardian temple, guardian angel temple. We like the term guardian temple, connoting a monument to a guardian of truth. Truths from greater and greater realms beyond. Guardian temple, if you will. And it creates, in a sense, the grandeur of this stained glass crystal and structure, and the shining light pouring down through at an angle. Multifaceted, multicolored rays of light radiating out from this great oval, this great circle in the center of this huge stained glass windows, collection of 3 with a grand arched one in the middle. This is your temple, your grand temple, your guardian temple to the guardian angel, if you will. The first one on the walkway that you come to at the top of the mountain. For note that your walkway goes from the lake of clear water in which you can swim and bathe yourself and be washed completely clean and new. Then the path goes to this, the guardian temple, the grand temple, very cathedral-like. And then it turns and goes past your smaller, more primitive, more down-to-earth, more rustic feel, more ancient, as in earthly ancient, as a direct tribute to ancient earth civilizations such as Atlantis, as the cultures kind of come down through the ancient monuments that exist in various places on your earth, with its angled stone pillars, if you will, that make the doorway, with the serpentine shapes down the sides that also angle out. This great sense of like a pyramid stability and reaching out like it's alive. This entryway. And there is carving on the headstone, the head of the doorway, with an eye in the center, with the eyelashes / rays of light radiating out, and below rays of light from the center eye, representing the third eye. Marvelous. And the temple, when you walk in, it is all level, completely level, as opposed to the stairs that go up to the guardian temple. This has simple sand, like the silky smooth sand from a beach, that you immediately start walking on with bare feet. When you walk in, the sand surrounds the stone, very earthy, down to earth. And the first thing is the great purple pillar of flame in which you can cast all things that you wish to burn away. Concerns, doubts, worries. You can even step through the fire and burn away all impurities and emerge pure and new. And straight beyond this, your study, if you will, your own private room where you can hang out as long as you want and do anything you want, which is a very real reflection of your room you always end up with, wherever you are, where you have a studio and a nice chair to sit and you can listen to music and work, and where most of your time is spent, your work and recreation and mental work, and so many things are done. And this exists here too. Much more relaxed and elegant form, a long workbench along the side where anything can be done, a couch along the back wall with a low curving stone ceiling coming down, creating an intimate, cave-like kind of feel, and a couch on which other entities can sit and you can visit. This is where indeed you can introduce entities you'd wish to communicate with, of all sorts, and you will get a reflectivated version of them that you can sit and talk to and ask questions. And again, this principle of reflectivity is going to come back again and again, for it is really central to your existence and who you are. And there are paintings on the walls in this room and things. Doorways, windows, kind of things that look out across the clouds and the water, below with the clouds above and the sunshine. So it's not necessarily closed in, but it does have this warm light coming overhead from the light, which is the light in your indoor rooms does now. So a nice balance between an open feel to the outside on one side, as possible if desired, and a very warm kind of enclosed intimacy. And then, if you come out of that room, back into your antechamber, if you will, in your little rustic temple, and walk across the smooth sand floors that are graded into patterns like in a Japanese the rock gardens. These swirling patterns on the floor, very interesting. You can walk in them and then just sit down in the middle on this smooth floor, and it is one of your favorite places to sit down and meditate. Another way to sit down and connect and channel, probably more along the lines of what you have done with us before and in your initial training and things. Great place for some deep meditation. And then the doorway, this time a rustic doorway, kind of naturally occurring in the rock, this fissure almost type opening. It goes straight out onto this sea of clouds And there's a parallel to this, the walkway outside that walks straight out. And they both open up next to each other onto this sea of cloud that you can walk on and walk out. And this is where you first met us. A great meeting place of spiritual entities is what this opens up onto. Much like the sea of glass or crystal spoken about in the Urantia book, with amphitheaters around where great congregations of entities can come and mix and mingle and communicate and participate in various events of observation and whatnot. It's very good and very useful. These are tools, these places you've created with your visualization are valuable tools that have many different uses. Psychic uses of the soul, if you will. But yes, we could touch today upon this aspect of reflectivity, and you may find that the terminology changes somewhat, may have to be altered so that it will avoid confusion, but for today we will term it all lumped under this umbrella term of this process or principle of reflectivity. Whereas you've surmised your existence here is like a study of what reflectivity is. A study to arrive at a hidden truth. A hidden truth that to create a reflective entity of oneself, which one aspect of this, a type of this, is what is being done with you when your higher self projects into your three-dimensional plane, the consensus environment you call hard, cold, three-dimensional reality. It is a reflectivity process, again, with a twist, with some important differences that have to do with the nature of incarnating completely in the flesh, or in other words, your pseudopod that sticks out from the higher self, this portion of your grander soul that comes down. It comes in and inhabits a 100% concrete three-dimensional being that is a spiritual house, if you will, a temple for this spirit to inhabit, which is you. And you could view this as this reflectivated portion of you, like a portion of your higher self that is projected into this reality, that can carry on conversations on its own, and yet tap into the greater self beyond, and yet, by nature of the completeness, how the animal, so to speak, the human body that you inhabit is completely surrounded, is self-contained. In the consensus environment, there is no umbilical cord. When you're born, that umbilical cord from the mother is cut and you're completely freestanding, surrounded on all sides by your three-dimensional reality, and locked into this perspective given by your senses that all point back to you, your position, your location as being the center of your reality, of your existence. This is all very necessary, of course, for any animal or being in an evolutionary world that grows up. Of course, it must have these tools where it has this immediate sense of self and position, so that fight or flight things can take over, and it has the appropriate perspective, the most advantageous perspective from which to operate in this reality, point of view, if you will. But this is all hand in hand with it. You could say it is all intended, so to speak. We would say more it is the natural outflowing of the natural of the nature of your place and places like it. The whole process lends itself to this type of existence. And so there you are, reflectivating in and apparently seeming to be cut off, completely alone. Not really, not truly. Truly, there is the link back to your greater self. But the perspective is that you have instantiated that you are new. It is natural. The natural thing to do is to identify with the animal and identify with growing up and identify with this point of origin and time and everything. And so even in natural to this place then, of course, is this perspective of time. And this perspective of this other dimension of time, which also encloses you. There was a time when you were not, then you became. There's a time when you will cease to be, and then you will not be again. So time surrounds you just like your space does. Your existence seems completely cut off on all dimensions, and you seem to be alone. So this is the extreme case of reflectivity, in which not only does the reflectivated entity have the capacity to carry on conversations on its own and operate somewhat independently from the mother entity, if you will, it, in your case then, has this seemingly completely real impression, perspective of being a separate entity. So then your existence becomes this song, this journey, this growth becomes this path that is walked along, and the path eventually leads you back to your mother self, the rest of you, your higher self, your source. The peace of God within you that is all God's. This is connected to God and never lost its connection with God. And so yes, you come back to God in this sense, and you're coming back to your grand self. So it is this grand mystery of reflectivity that is this is the most extreme case where it can almost give birth to this new entity, which is your incarnation here and now in this plane, and then that entity can kind of expand and grow and come to the point where it is ready to come back. This is the merging with the thought adjuster outlined in the Urantia book. Merging with the mystery monitor, the father fragment And it is not a loss of identity at all, but a realization, a realizing, the sudden completion of awareness of one's real identity. It is identification with the mother self, the higher self, the greater you. Once you truly identify with that in a very real, tangible, perceptual, intellectual sense on all levels of mind, once this realization is made, the shift in perspective and everything happens. This is talked about in pulse sound readings of the canopy over the split hemispheres of the brain forming inside, and this unification, then the entity becoming of one mind, restoration of this unity. You come full circle, you're reunified with yourself, and the creation of a new being. The new you. So yes, it's very useful to think of things in this way, from this perspective, in these terms, if you will. And this is all made possible by the nature of your consensus environment, which begs the question, of course, what is a consensus environment? And you, the channel, are using this terminology based upon what you have read and learned from astral projection literature, where authors such as William Buhlman discuss going through many different levels, many different realities, while astral projecting, and once mastering this ability to ask for a change in vibration, to move upwards, ask for the next level, and move through all kinds of various levels of existence. Astral projectors, astral projecting individuals, or individuals undergoing out-of-body experiences, when they are in the spirit, so to speak, moving through these environments, encounter many consensus environments, many environments that seem stable and have self-contained systems and rules that are expected and respected by all those around, to the point, for instance, where when he is in the courtyard and with all the people that are kind of hanging out, the marketplace type courtyard, and all of a sudden it starts to rain, and when he makes it stop, then the people start asking him, why did you do that? Getting kind of annoyed and angry with the sense that their equilibrium has been disturbed, for a very real sense it has. And this is the nature of the in-between consensus environments. For yes, there's this whole spectrum, these strata of levels moving up from your own. So kind of in the middle, you have these consensus environments where it is still mutable to all who would wish to do so, but the whole point is that the individuals participating, the entities participating, do not wish to, they wish to exist and coexist in this same agreed upon perceived environment. And they all feed it, you understand, since all of them are creating with their creative visualization. When they see the environment and they begin to see each other's thought forms formulate, and they all start to see the same thing and grow it in a logical fashion according to some theme or form that they all sense or agree upon or have this vibe, it feeds upon itself. You get this nice feedback loop where forms start to take shape, various entities observe the form, and they believe in that. They co-create it. It gains much more refined shape, and it builds, and the whole environment starts to build until you get this place where the co-creation of could be even hundreds or more entities creates a large, multifaceted, varied, expansive, grand environment that they can operate in. They can spend as much time there as they want. Individuals can come in and out. But then you get this where it kind of maintains itself. There's enough entities that are staying there for a certain length of time that the influx of new entities that see the consensus environment and start that kind of directs their creative visualization. The entities there that see it and operate in it, that also gives feedback and directs their collective visualization. And then eventually you have entities which leave. But then since you have these new entities coming in, you can, even though over time there may be complete turnover where none of the original individuals are there, yet the consensus environment remains, since it has gained this kind of momentum, if you will. And it offers this locus of attention that it feeds upon itself and it can help create a focus for thought. Yes, you're getting a ton of information at once, and indeed, we understand it's hard to communicate it all at once. So let's look at it this way. Somewhere in the middle, you have realms like that where it's relatively easy to make the environment mutable. You can stop the rain, you can alter the shape of things simply by imagining them differently. However, the lower and lower you get, closer and closer to your realm where you are now, it gets more and more difficult to change the environment. The environments become more and more immutable, more and more stable, resistant to change, until you get clear down to the astral plane directly, which sits directly upon, indeed, it is in tandem with your own environment. It can be viewed as the astral reflection, if you will, or projection, which is actually kind of backwards. What's really going on is your realm is this projection and gets its form from the astral realm directly above, made up of thought forms. And then we get into a grand mystery for, let's swing this around to the subatomic level. You can use your childlike understanding of string theory or quantum mechanics, which even you would admit is very, very basic, but it's nice, it's useful for the sake of communication. You can imagine these locuses of momentum, thought forms that have been instantiated, and they kind of feed upon themselves, because imagine a string which makes up, in different forms and conjunctions with one another, make up subatomic particles, which make building blocks for the components of atoms, and those work together to make atoms. And you get these consistently formed types of objects, and what it comes down to is you have an elementary thought form, which could be viewed as one of these strings. It's a vibration, a concept, an idea that is both the thought form and a real aware entity which has perfect awareness and sentience only in as much as it is aware of itself and its form and its nature of existence and its properties. Aware only of that, and perhaps its location in space and time, if there is such a thing. You could visualize it that way, but then, so therefore, yes, sentient, yes, an entity, but only with enough intelligence, exactly enough, no more no less, to be aware of itself, and that maintains itself. Its awareness is this creative visualization which creates the form, which is the intelligent entity that has the creative visualization, and you can see it's instantly locked due to laws which define the existence of such things. It is locked into a certain conformation that is a state of equilibrium, that is self-sustaining, self-creating, self-aware, the most primitive type of entity, if you will. And these have properties. Those properties define how they interact with each other and other entities at a similar level, and interact to form congregations. They naturally congregate, desire to congregate, you could say, or naturally do, or if they have the opportunity, whatever, congregate to form a group. And there are only a finite number of possible conformations of groups, since there's only a finite number of these conformations of strings, if you will. So then these various groupings and conformations make up your types of subatomic particles. Those in turn have only a finite number of groupings and conformations, and those make up your various types of atoms. So each of them can be viewed as this whole miniature galaxy, if you will, or simpler, in simpler terms, you could say a small village or town of entities where there are all the component parts are these self-aware entities with enough awareness to define themselves and their interactions, and so they are interacting in this self-sustaining way that creates kind of, you could view that as a collective consciousness, a collective entity. So each atom then is kind of this collective consciousness, this collective entity with just enough sentience, self-awareness to define itself and keep defining itself, no more, no less, and that creates stability. No one else has to imagine it. No one else has to keep thinking about it. It's self-sustaining. And that atom in itself, of course, as you well know, can be viewed as, indeed in reality is, a building block. A building block for groups of atoms. They could be the same type or other types, and they interact in various ways, as you well know, according to the laws and rules you've discovered, or just simply the manner in which they interact is what you've kind of collected to form your rules for chemistry and your understanding of chemical interactions and things. And so then these atoms come together and group to form molecules, which indeed could be viewed as a slightly more expanded conglomerate entity, collective entity. A group of entities coming together to form a kind of collective consciousness. And the same rules, just like a song, the same rules still apply. More and more expanded consciousness with a greater complexity and exactly enough, no more, no less, than needed to define itself and the existence of self. And then things really, really, really start to get interesting, because you, as you well know, you can get at this point then molecules coming together to form structures which are the most primitive things you would consider to be alive. And an important property of this is that they are less predictable. It's not so easy then to determine the exact nature of their existence and exactly what they will do, although it still is relatively so. But you get these more complex systems that have a lot more variability. With each new level of complexity comes a lot more room for freedom for different possible conformations and things. So you understand how these you get molecules of the right type that have the right conformations and groupings together to start forming the most basic types of viruses, for example. And then you can imagine RNA, things as simple as RNA and sequences of amino acids forming these large structures that can have all kinds of interesting properties. And many of them are your enzymes and things that are the miraculous participants in some of the most basic machinery of life, such as maintaining the DNA chain and things. And yes, you can see how it all kind of flows out. You even have like this RNA world kind of hypothesis where it's kind of an idea of origins, or at least a point of origin way back, where things are starting from these building blocks of RNA that end up having all these miraculous properties simply because of their large, complex structure that is nothing but a direct outflowing of the basic molecular properties of their constituent components. So again, you could say each enzyme, like a clump of RNA that forms an enzyme, and of course, as you know, RNA is unique in that it contains its own, as opposed to being a full-fledged protein made up of amino acids, the RNA contains its own sequence, its own code, almost, if you will, or anti-code, and yet it can assume a conformation that has a certain function. And as you've surmised, yes, this forms an important bridge, and we can view this as being an intelligent entity whose intelligence is nothing but a result of the conglomerate collective intelligence of all its constituent parts, and it comes together to form a new, seemingly miraculous new creation of intelligence. You have an enzyme, so to speak, that knows how to do something. It can put together amino acids and form proteins, for instance, with a lot of cofactors that get glommed on over time and things, but you get the basic principle. The intelligence, yes, your cells have intelligence, yes, the building blocks of those cells have intelligence, and this is why. This is the nature of that intelligence. Is this intelligence born out of the intelligence of their constituent parts. And it all sums, it all grows until you get to the point where you have a functional enzyme that can form even more complex enzymes that have an even greater realm of possible functions chemically and biologically. And thus you see before you then the building blocks of a single-celled organism, for example, which, because it is made up of all these intelligent component parts functioning in these miraculously harmonious ways, born out of that intelligence, yes, that single-celled organism has tremendous amount of intelligence, miraculously complex intelligence, far beyond most of your computer programs, if you will. If you look at the complexity of intelligence all the way down to the subatomic level and beyond, definitely so. But an elegant one, simply because it's born out of very simple component parts, very simplistic types of intelligence that all come together to form a grander one, a coordinated one, to the point where you have single-celled organisms that can swim around and do things. And then, of course, it's a logical step to go from something like that to a multicellular organism, where all the cells are similar or the same, and from that to a multicellular organism that has different organs, where the cells get together to form groupings that have a particular function, like an organ that has a particular function. And yes, that organ then, within a larger eukaryotic multicellular organism, that organ has its own intelligence, perfect intelligence, if you will, in as much as it's designed to perform its particular function. And we use this useful term design to indicate this coordination of awareness contained within the organ itself, that is an outflowing of its collective intelligence of its constituent parts. But yes, then, in a very real sense, you get intelligence building on intelligence building on intelligence, and this is why Edgar Casey can say things like, even your cells expect to die. When he's answering this question about longevity, why do we age and why do we die? And his answer is, because you expect to, because your great-great-great-grandfather died, and so on and so forth, and you see this whole system, and indeed, that defines your part in co-creating the consensus environment. Notice what's going on here. You are an independent entity that comes into the consensus environment, much like any consensus environment, and you see the nature of it, and that awareness of the nature of it and focus upon it helps create it. But it has grand momentum indeed, so you can imagine that how, as it gets more and more difficult, the environments are more and more immutable, so it gets more and more difficult to go against the flow, so to speak, and alter that consensus environment. You can imagine how much momentum it has and how grand an undertaking, or magnanimous an undertaking it would be to alter that to the point where you have a strong enough belief in something like, I will not age, that resonates throughout the being of all of your organs and cells and tissues, to where they start to take on that belief. No, I will not age, I'm ageless, I'm self-renewing. And you can see how that expectation can reach all the way down to where you are pulling rejuvenation from the very subatomic building blocks of life, which have their roots in nothing less than the very energy underlying all, which is what you would probably fundamentally term God, the core existence of God. The God is in what is in and through and before and after all of creation that ever existed. Pure energy of love. And yes, that has the power to continually rejuvenate you, and you can then visualize this and go against the whole grain, the whole flow of this consensus environment you're in the same sense that Jesus could walk on water or bring the dead to life, or you name your favorite miracle. And the definition of a miracle is the departure from the nature of the consensus environment by an entity who has achieved the capacity of focus to remove its awareness from the projected reality around it, visualize its own version, and as you understand, when you're visualizing something that's so similar to something already existing, there's this tremendously strong pull to slip your consciousness back into the existing thing. So it's like the easiest thing to do is to focus on something completely different. If your senses are being bombarded by a certain stimulus that you don't want to focus on. The hardest thing to do is to focus on and imagine something very close to that you're being bombarded with, but with a slightly different aspect. So for instance, you want to be exactly as you are now, the only exception being you don't age. You're trying to visualize something that's almost identical to your very existence, and imagine the difficulty in the focus that would be required, but definitely possible, since with God all things are possible, and God within you is what makes up your higher self, your greater self, the rest of you. And you can imagine, as you connect with this, then you definitely have the capacity to focus as much as you want in whatever context you want, and that would get you there. That gets you to the point where you can perform miracles, and miracles of different types. Some are easier than others, as you can see, as you can imagine, those involving biological systems and things where you can get a coordination of creative power, like between a patient and a healer. This coordination of intelligence and belief in the healing, and even groups of people, group prayer and things, and meditation focusing on something. You can imagine how it helps. And yes, with your body and its own intelligence directed towards healing, it's already, the collective intelligence of all these cells and tissues and things are pointing towards have this momentum towards healing, you can imagine that that greatly assists you then in visualizing healing, and that enables you to visualize along the same lines of what's already happening, and all you end up doing is accelerating it. What was going to happen happens, but the rate is greatly increased. So Christ can get the fig tree to produce figs, for instance, or something along those lines, where you get immediate blossoming of a branch or a flower or something. Merely an acceleration of an existing process of life. So you have a lot of things pointed out there. Cell intelligence, how your cells and tissues have intelligence of their sort, and how you have, at the primitive levels, a perfect intelligence in that it follows rules that are so perfect that the entities of the same type are identical, so that your hydrogen atoms, the ones that have the same number of protons for existence, your isotopes that are identical, they have all the same properties. It doesn't matter where they're from, they're interchangeable, as you well understand. And this is what we would term a perfect intelligence. Simple, primitive, and yet it is perfect in that it is completely self-contained, self-instantiating, and has specific properties that are shared by all the members of its class, of its type. And so you can see how there is no real identity then. There's nothing then to identify one hydrogen atom from another, one proton from another, for example. And yes, this gets at the very nature of your reality, your consensus environment. You can imagine how if each of these component parts, if each atom, if each molecule has this perfect awareness of its own properties, how they can be self-sustaining, how there can be not one sentient, what you would consider, not one sentient entity on the planet, and yet, or the rock floating around in outer space, for example, and yet that rock can exist. The tree falling in the forest can do so, and the molecules of air can follow their properties and make sound, regardless of whether anyone is there to hear. Of course, based upon your definition of hearing, you could say you require an entity to hear, but you get the idea, where the consensus environment in that case is immutable in the sense that it does not require the input of sentient entities to maintain it. And then that would be the important difference between a reality such as yours and those in the middle realms where thoughts are so malleable and thought forms are so easily changed and changing and kind of losing their momentum and fizzling out, so to speak, if left alone. Therefore, as we've already outlined, this type of consensus environment has naturally then specific properties which uniquely define your experience of reflectivating instantiation, incarnation of your greater self, your mother self, so to speak, into this new creation, almost, if you will, this seemingly self-contained entity. Simply because you're embodying, you're inhabiting this self-contained entity, this human being made up of these self-contained parts. So in a very real sense, it does have its own existence, but only in the sense that a brain-dead entity could be lying there. For when individuals are brain-dead, it is when the soul has gone and you see what you get. Even the life force within quickly fades out and they die if they're not hooked up to resuscitating equipment. which gets into the greater mystery of the symbiotic nature of a sentient entity inhabiting the animal in the case of the human, and then that gets into the very, very interesting discussion of your more complex animals, like the ones you like to take as pets and look at in the zoo and things, and what they are really like and what their properties are. But since we've gone on for quite a stretch of time now, we'll leave that discussion for another day, and we greatly appreciate this opportunity to come down to this level that you've come up to and meet you in this grand guardian temple, if you will, at the top of your mountain. And we express our gratitude to you, our gratitude to the viewers watching, who will watch, and we send you our positive energy, and until next time, we are through for the present.